What was life like as a Jedi in Luke Skywalker's new academy? In the year 4 ABY, the Galactic Empire was destroyed, Lord Vader and his Emperor were vanquished. The light side of the Force prevailed, and the triumph of the Chosen One echoed through the stars. But there was a rebuilding to be done now. Luke would not rest in the following years, but would go on a journey of his own to discover Jedi lore, to gather different perspectives on the Force, seeking students for the new Jedi Order. From here, he would foster the next generation of Jedi Knights to guard the New Republic. But life in Luke Skywalker's academy would look very different from all the previous iterations of the Jedi that we've seen before, and there were stark deviations in the way Luke did things and the ways of the old Jedi. Greetings again, lore junkies, and welcome to the archives. In today's holocron, we're going to journey into a topic we've been quite interested to explore in more detail. What was it truly like to be a student of the new Jedi Order? How did Luke train his Jedi despite only having cursory knowledge of the Force himself? And by the end of this video, we want to pose the question to you. Do you think you would prefer to train in Luke's Praxium or the classic Jedi Order? To begin, the first major difference is the kinds of people that Luke accepted into his Jedi. In the old Jedi Order, they only took in infants who hadn't yet been traumatized by life in the wider galaxy. This made them pure canvases for training the concepts of peace and detachment. But Luke was not keen on having his academy be a daycare on top of training brand new students. And so, especially in the beginning of the new Jedi Order, it didn't matter how old you were or what your background was. If you had the power of the Force resonating within you, Luke Skywalker was going to be in your DMs. Among the oldest students of his academy was a gas miner by the name of Streen, who was in his 60s when Luke recruited him. So no matter how old you were or what your current life situation looked like, you have the opportunity to drop everything and become a Jedi. Next, we have to talk about why Luke called his Jedi the Praxium, because it plays into the core method of teaching that Luke would use. The word Praxium out of universe was created by author Karen Anderson and based on the Latin word of praxis, which means demonstration. More explicitly, the word's origins in ancient Greek translates to action, activity, or practice. And so, as Luke himself explains it, the Praxium means a place for learning of action. The reason this is important to bring up is because action was exactly what Luke made his students learn. What's glaringly obvious about the new Jedi Order is that in a post-Empire era, information on Jedi practices were scarce, if not basically extinct. Sometimes Luke would get lucky with crumbling manuscripts, books, carvings, ruins, or old holotapes. And of course, finding a holocron was more valuable to Luke than all of the credit chips in the New Republic's vaults. But by and large, Luke had to solely rely on a few weeks of training that he accumulated between Ben Kenobi and later Yoda, and then teach the rest that he had to figure out completely on his own. And so because so much of his own learning of the Force came through experience, this is how he encouraged his own Jedi to train. And so to start out, if you were a student in Luke's Jedi Academy, your life would be very active. The biggest thing is Master Skywalker's teaching was very hands-on. In the early days, Luke would hold large classes that every trainee would attend. There, he would teach a crucial lesson of the Force. Then he would release his students to go out on their own, to practice what they had learned. To help with this, Luke introduced a sort of buddy system as well. His students would each choose someone they're familiar with to be their training buddy, for those two partners to go out and then help one another find their way in the Force. Luke highly encouraged this idea of every Jedi finding their own unique connection to the Force. Luke realized quickly that no two Jedi will always connect to the Force in the same way, so it was up to them to know when to meditate, to train the mind, and when to practice combat to train the body. But in all things, the students were taught to open themselves to the Force so that they were always training with their spirit. Two of the earliest abilities taught to initiates was breath control and a healing trance. Breath control helped to regulate the body, to calm the mind, allowing one to keep their pathways open in all circumstances. This would in turn allow them to more easily harness Force valor and allow the Force to carry their body beyond natural limits. But more importantly, Luke taught his students a meditation technique that would one day save their lives. In a simple application, this was the art of being able to slip into a trance to recover stamina and to refresh the body. With enough practice though, a Jedi would cease to require sleep. Instead, they could simply enter this trance for a few hours to get a full night's rest. Within a few months of practice, some of Luke's students were able to recover themselves from life-threatening amounts of fatigue, and in more advanced applications, the healing trance could flush one's body of toxins, poisons, and even some diseases, or at least stave off the most harmful effects. Luke believed purely in the practical and rarely in the theoretical, and to Luke, this basic ability was the utmost in practicality. It should become the first thing his Jedi fall back on when they're in trouble, and the healing trance was perhaps the power used most often by Luke's students throughout their adventures. Just know that if you're a student at Luke's Academy, you'll want to learn the healing trance as quickly as possible, because it's not likely you'll be getting a good night's rest anytime soon. Rather than a nice cushioned cot in the Coruscant Jedi Temple, you'll be getting a blanket or a mat on the cold, pest-infested stone floor in your chambers of the Massassi temples. In line with the focus on practicality, the very location of the Praxium was selected with this in mind. At first, Yavin IV was simply an opportunistic pick since it was quiet and out of the way, but Luke saw beyond the benefits of its secluded location. The harsh jungles of the Yavin Moon served an excellent honing tool for toughening Jedi. Exar Kun once inhabited this world, and he left behind many horrifying Sith experiments that still populate the jungles to this very day. Living on Yavin, there was always the possibility of running into the two-headed battle hydras with a venom stinger that could melt solid matter. But that was the exception rather than the rule. But there were still many dangerous creatures to watch out for. This life got trainees used to being uncomfortable, to accept a more humble life in a hostile environment, and to connect with the flora and fauna around them through the living force. But what really helped out was the aforementioned Massassi temple that he used for the actual building of his school. This temple had been the same one used by the rebellion during the war, and it had been built long ago by the ancient Sith, under the direction of Naga Sadow, and then later completed by Exar Kun. The Massassi slave caste of ancient Sith purebloods constructed many temples around the Yavin jungle. Here, their Sith masters would conduct dark rituals and be worshipped by the Massassi. But the power of the dark side had long since faded from the Ziggurat, and they were mostly safe for use for Jedi. Of course, there was the small issue where the spirit of Exar Kun still lingered in the cold walls, and even began turning some of Luke's students to the dark side. But luckily, they got that figured out as well, and would permanently banish his spirit to chaos. The only location to worry about for you is an ominous temple of obsidian in the middle of an eerily still lake deep in the jungle. This is where Exar Kun carried out his darkest and most sinister experiments. The dark side still haunts this area. However, Luke himself sees this not as a threat, but as an opportunity. But we'll talk about this in just a minute. Going further into his training, Luke would utilize what he had hands-on. Without fancy Jedi Temple equipment, he had to get creative with the Massassi temples. When teaching his students about the defensive applications of the Force, Luke taught them how to shield both themselves and each other with other abilities. Once their danger senses alerted them to an immediate threat, they would instinctively wrap themselves or someone else in a cocoon of Force energy to keep themselves safe. In order to demonstrate the technique, Luke would wake up all of his students in the middle of the night, taking them to a subterranean hot spring. There, he had all of them float and meditate together in one of the warm pools, connecting with the gas giant Yavin Prime. This allowed them to contemplate on the cosmic force, but while they were there, he would let them know that a boiling geyser would soon bubble up and burst from the ground below. Using the geyser, he taught his students to listen for danger and to protect themselves and each other from the searing hot steam. Of course, Luke would never allow any real harm to come to his students, so if he sensed that one of them was going to need help, he shielded them instantly himself. By the year 14 ABY, Luke had converted some of the ancient temples into an obstacle course that he used to accelerate his students' understanding of their new powers. Luke was keen on teaching his students on how to manifest the Force as quickly as possible, so the obstacle course served as a crash course guide on telekinesis, Force valor, and even blast deflection. There were varying levels of difficulty depending on which course you took, and Luke had access to stun blasting training remotes and training droids that wielded stun lightsabers. Depending on the student, he could increase the intensity of these droids to help boost their training, but there would come a time when the resources of Yavin IV would be tapped. And in that event, Luke would encourage his students to leave the planet, to go out in the galaxy and look for places in need. To the Grand Master, they could not simply stay on Yavin perpetually training and meditating. they needed to experience what life will be like as a Jedi, actively out there serving as a guardian. So all in all, when your time comes, you should expect to be pushed out of the nest, not kept locked under the Jedi Temple. Later, when more experienced Jedi would join the Academy and would rise through the ranks, Luke would finally have some masters take on students rather than having to teach them all himself. But since there were so few masters, they rarely actually took on a single apprentice. Unlike in the yesteryear of the Jedi Academy, there was no master to hold a single Padawan's hand all the way through their training. In actuality, one master served more like an overseer and an advisor to several students or buddy groups at once. There was also usually one teacher per subject at the Academy, like when Kyle Katarn took on the mantle as Battlemaster and was in charge of overseeing all lightsaber combat training. But it was Luke who commanded and taught the will and guidance of the Force. Even the teachers at the Academy came to Luke with questions. As the Grand Master and the one who began it all, he was the pinnacle of knowledge when it came to the Jedi way, especially since he was the only one among them with classical training from two Jedi Masters of the older era. The philosophical teachings Luke would impart always came from Yoda and Obi-Wan. In fact, he quoted them so often that anything they once said was basically gospel to the new Jedi. His students knew the two masters well just by Luke's detailed stories and recollections, even well enough that some of the younger ones would amuse each other with impressions of Yoda's voice. But that was because of how hard Luke hammered in their lessons. Do or do not, there is no try would actually end up as a tenet in the updated Jedi Code. Which brings us to this. Luke was very keen on ensuring that his Jedi would be the guardians that the galaxy had been sorely lacking all of these years. And so he was extremely careful with their training, wanting to make sure that the importance of service was taken as seriously as possible. To this end, he would somewhat reformat the Jedi Code. He had to keep in mind that he was introducing a new concept of the Jedi Order to his students, who by and large would not know anything about the Jedi. The Empire put a lot of work into completely erasing their history, to the point where anyone born in the age of the Empire would basically have no knowledge of the Jedi Order outside of tales and legends, if even that. So a lot of Luke's teachings began with foundational knowledge and truths to the life of a Jedi. He did eventually learn and teach them the original Jedi Code, though it was a slightly alternate version. There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no death, there is the Force. This is the version that Luke had learned from the holocron of Odan-Ur, who was a Jedi Master back in the days of circa 4000 BBY, stemming from the era of around the Great Sith War. It omits the fourth line from the code. There is no chaos, there is harmony. The reason for this is unknown, but it's likely because the line comes from a later edition of the Jedi Code. And since this ancient holocron was the only one that Luke found, he only knew this version. But in the year 22 ABY, Luke had reformatted his own code to exemplify what it meant to be a Jedi in this new era, and his new code went as follows. A Jedi's promise must be the most serious, the deepest of his or her life. A Jedi seeks no adventure or excitement. For a Jedi is passive, calm, and at peace. A Jedi knows that anger, fear, and aggression lead to the dark side. A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. There is no try, only do. Believe and you succeed. And above all else, know that control of the Force comes only from concentration and training. Perhaps not quite as quotable as the original, but it nonetheless impresses the important points of being a Jedi. When it comes to the subject of the dark side, Luke was candid with his students. Starting out, it was his greatest fear that he would repeat the same failures of Obi-Wan, to spawn another Darth Vader to set loose on the stars. Luke was very uncomfortable with the subject of the dark side, and harshly warned against it. But soon, he would have to adapt after two of his students went dark after being tempted by Exar Kun. Gantoris had been the first, but he resisted and was killed by the Spectre. Kip Durin was next, and he had caused the Sun Crusher to go on a rampage against what was left of the Imperials, causing the deaths of thousands at a minimum. But Luke would have mercy on his student and rehabilitate him. He would learn how to approach the dark side in the process. His approach was simple. Do not fear it. If his students had questions, he would answer them. After all, Luke had first-hand experience with the dark side. Only 10 years after the Battle of Yavin, Luke had temporarily become the apprentice of the resurrected Darth Sidious in order to learn why his father had been so tempted by the power. He got to see the Emperor up close, hoping to kill him. Only Leia, though, was able to shake Luke back to his senses, so Luke could answer questions about the dark side honestly. Not only this, but he was a proprietor of his Jedi knowing their enemy. They would be facing the dark side in their own journeys, and they could not be left unprepared to fight it. So he would allow some of them to study information about even the Sith, the dark side under supervision of greater Jedi Masters. Skywalker would even go as far to personally accompany his students on journeys to the Obsidian Temple of Exar Kun, a place still plagued with the dark side. He thought of it as having the same functionality as the dark side cave of Dagobah, which had greatly helped in his own Jedi training. He did this with Kip Durin, believing that whatever was inside the temple would help confront the darkness within him. And on another occasion, he would actually take a handful of students to the actual dark side cave of Dagobah. These instances were rare and only for special cases, such as students having nightmares of the dark side. But Luke still did it nonetheless. In keeping with arming his pupils against the emotions that lead to evil, Luke did not forbid attachment. He believed that fighting for what you love would give his Jedi the boost that they needed. In Luke's eyes, it wasn't attachment itself that caused the Jedi to fall, but rather their inability to deal with the emotions that attachments can produce. So he allowed them to love, to marry, and to have families, because it gave them something to fight for. And he would teach them mindfulness, how to harness their love for their families for the light, and not for selfishness. Luke also believed that if his Jedi married, they would produce more Force wielders, creating more Jedi for the future. So even if you might be a bit uncomfortable living on Yavin, rest assured you would get to have your own life. You could have a family, and you could do things outside of being a Jedi if you chose to. There is only one more thing to talk about when it comes to life in the Jedi Praxium, and that is your lightsaber. Having a lightsaber in Luke's academy was a very big deal. To Luke, having a lightsaber was the definitive symbol of one becoming a Jedi Knight. It was the badge that gave you authority, and it represented the sacred duty that came with being a part of the Jedi Order. Knowledge on how to build a lightsaber belonged to the Grand Master, and he was keen on training his students as far as possible before entering the realms of the lightsaber and lightsaber combat. So for quite a while, most of your fellow classmates would train with wooden practice swords, or staffs, or learn the art of unarmed combat. There are only a few exceptions to this rule. The first is Corran Horn, who inherited his grandfather's lightsaber. Next is Kyle Katarn, who inherited his from his father. Next is Jaden Kor, who inexplicitly constructed his while in a dreamlike state one night. And Gantoris, who was given the knowledge by Exar Kun. Luke waited for quite some time before introducing lightsabers to his first few classes of Jedi, but it was only until a crisis struck in 23 ABY that Luke decided he needed to start arming his trainees much earlier. In that instance, a Dark Jedi Academy was on the rise, acting as a malevolent mirror to Luke's Jedi Praxium. This so-called Shadow Academy had been training Dark Jedi to serve the Second Imperium, one of the last of the Imperial remnants. With an attack imminent, Luke resolved that his trainees needed to be able to defend themselves much sooner. Luke would do what he could to provide some components for the lightsaber, but mostly, as per usual, he encouraged his students to go through the old technologies left behind by the rebellion, or to go out and to find their own components for the hilt in the galaxy. But of course, an important factor to point out is that it's basically impossible to find a kyber crystal at this point. That is, unless you inherited one or have a very rich contact. However, as Luke himself found out and would pass on to his students, any kind of gem would do. Karuska gems, rare and valued for their beauty, they could be used in place of kyber, along with other precious stones. While they lacked the living connection to the force that kyber held, they were effective for producing a lightsaber blade. In a bizarre instance, the Mon Calamari master Silgal used an Ultima Pearl from her homeworld for her lightsaber crystal. But if all else failed, Luke provided his knowledge for creating artificial crystals like the one he used in his own green weapon. Due to this use whatever you can find mentality, Luke's Jedi Academy boasted an extremely wide array of lightsaber colors. Some were incredibly unique and visually distinct. For example, Gantoris' lightsaber used 3 Karuska gems, resulting in it producing a violet color with flushes of rainbow light running up and down the blade. So what was it like to be a student of Luke Skywalker? It had its tough moments for sure. You would not have a comfortable living situation. Nothing would be handed to you. You would have to work for everything that you got. And although you were shown the way, there was an expectation that you would find your own path to the Force. However, you had a more open and a loving community of fellow Jedi. You had vast amounts of freedom that no other Jedi Order in history got, and even your own family if you desired. Every accomplishment would feel earned. You could venture into the galaxy knowing that your training buddy always had your back. There was no fear of the dark side, only knowledge and peace, with the ability to live and love freely, to pave your own journey in the Force. You would likely become far more powerful than the Jedi of the past. But of course, that came with many trials as well. Yavin IV was not as protected as Coruscant, and there were many attacks. Safety was not guaranteed, but this molds you into becoming a strong Jedi. So what is your verdict, my friends? Do you choose the rugged, yet rewarding life under Grandmaster Luke Skywalker and his Jedi Praxium? Or do you go with the safe long haul of the classic Jedi Temple of Coruscant? We're eager to see what you have to say about this generation of Jedi, and how Luke chose to teach his students. As always, thank you guys so much for watching and supporting the channel. Until next time, may the Force be with you.